Welcome. Today is June 11th, 10th, Thursday, June 10th, 2021. This is A Course in Miracles Palm Beach Study Group. If we can start with a moment of silence, please. Welcome, everyone. We are on page 52 in the text, chapter 4, The Illusions of the Ego. And this is the introduction. The Bible says that you should go with a brother twice as far as he asks. It certainly does not suggest that you set him back on his journey. Devotion to a brother cannot set you back either. It can lead only to mutual progress. The result of genuine devotion is inspiration, a word which, properly understood, is the opposite of fatigue. To be fatigued is to be dispirited, but to be inspired is to be in the spirit. To be egocentric is to be dispirited, but to be self-centered, with a capital S, in the right sense, is to be inspired or in spirit. The truly inspired are enlightened and cannot abide in darkness. Are there any questions? Well, then let's go to paragraph 2. You can speak from the spirit or from the ego as you choose. If you speak from spirit, you have chosen to, quote, be still and know that I am God, unquote. These words are inspired because they reflect knowledge. If you speak from the ego, you are disclaiming knowledge instead of affirming it, and are thus dispiriting yourself. Do not embark on useless journeys, because they are indeed in vain. The ego may desire them, but spirit cannot embark on them, because it is forever unwilling to depart from its foundation. Questions? Okay. Paragraph 3. The journey to the cross should be the last useless journey, in quotes. Do not dwell upon it, but dismiss it as accomplished. If you can accept it as your own last useless journey, you are also free to join my resurrection. Until you do so, your life is indeed wasted. It merely reenacts the separation, the loss of power, the futile attempts of the ego at reparation, and finally, the crucifixion of the body, or death. Such repetitions are endless until they are voluntarily given up. Do not make the pathetic error of, quote, clinging to the old rugged cross, unquote. The only message of the crucifixion is that you can overcome the cross. Until then, you are free to crucify yourself as often as you choose. This is not the gospel I intended to offer you. We have another journey to undertake, and if you will read these lessons carefully, they will help prepare you to undertake it. So, to begin with, we understand that the voice who's speaking is the voice of Jesus, that he was the one who gave these teachings to Helen Schuckman, who took them down in shorthand and was responsible for publishing the Course in Miracles in the first place. So Jesus is trying to explain some things that the Bible kind of got wrong, and that traditional Christianity kind of got wrong. And he's trying to clarify this, which he does do many times throughout the course. Donna, do you have a question?
No, I just think, the concepts I understand, is just to kind of walk the talk is hard to do, like to overcome the ego and to be selfless.
Right.
That's the journey. That's, that could take a lifetime.
Well, usually several lifetimes. But yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to mute yourself unless you have questions to ask, because we are recording this and sometimes there's background noises. So, and you can also raise your hand if you have a question to get my attention, or you can just speak up. So yeah, so Jesus is saying, especially there at the end, that the journey of the cross, the traditional way of thinking of it, clinging to the old rugged cross, that's a useless journey. That's not what he came to teach. He came in paragraph 3, sentence 8 says, the only message of the crucifixion is that you can overcome the cross. In other words, you can overcome the burdens and the sufferings that we do experience here in this ego world. But he says, but until then, you're free to crucify yourself as much as you choose. I mean, there are times when he can be quite humorous in here. I mean, he was talking to Helen, and Helen had quite a habit of crucifying herself. So if you understand the backstory, it's more insightful to some of the little messages in here. But he says, but this is not the gospel I intended to offer you. Unfortunately, it's been the gospel that we've been taught through Christianity over several hundreds of years. But then he's saying we have another journey to undertake, and that's the journey of A Course in Miracles. And if you read these lessons carefully, they will help prepare you to undertake it. We can learn how to navigate ourselves out of the ego and into heaven. So now we're going to go on. That was the introduction. We're going to go on to chapter 1. And if you're reading this online, just click the little arrow at the bottom of that screen. It should navigate you directly to the next page. And this is It's still chapter 4, but it's section 1, right teaching and right learning. Paragraph 1. A good teacher clarifies his own ideas and strengthens them by teaching them. Teacher and pupil are alike in the learning process. They are in the same order of learning. And unless they share their lessons, conviction will be lacking. A good teacher must believe in the ideas he teaches, but he must meet another condition. He must believe in the students to whom he offers the ideas. Paragraph 2. Many stand guard over their ideas because they want to protect their thought systems as they are, and learning means change. Change is always fearful to the separated because they cannot conceive of it as a move toward healing the separation. I'll go over that again. Change is always fearful to those who are caught in the ego world, which is the world of separation, which is the ego world teaches that we are separate from God our Father, that we are separate from Spirit. God's up there in the clouds in the heaven, we're down here on earth suffering. That's the separation. So he's saying change is always fearful to the separated, those trapped in ego, because they cannot conceive of it as a move towards healing the separation. They cannot conceive of change as a move toward healing the separation. But of course, in miracles, that's the objective of it entirely, is to heal the separation and to teach us how we can do that. So paragraph 3, they always perceive it as a move toward further separation. People caught in the ego think changing is going to bring it and make it even more separate, because the separation was their first experience of change. We were originally in heaven with our Father, perfect, eternal, innocent beings. And then we had this mad thought that we could be separated from our Father. And all of a sudden we created the ego world and got caught in it. But it was of our own making. And that was our first experience of separation. You believe that if you allow no change to enter into your ego, you will find peace. This profound confusion is possible only if you maintain that the same thought system can stand on two foundations. So, first of all, you'll never find peace in the ego world. Secondly, the two foundations are the foundation of the ego and the foundation of the spirit. And you can't stand on two foundations at the same time. Nothing, sentence 6, nothing can reach spirit from the ego, and nothing can reach the ego from spirit. Spirit can neither strengthen the ego nor reduce the conflict within it. The ego is a contradiction. Yourself and God's self are in opposition. They are opposed in source, in direction, and in outcome. I'm going to clarify that sentence. Your ego self and your God self are in opposition. They are opposed in source, in direction, and in outcome. They are fundamentally irreconcilable because spirit cannot perceive the ego, and because spirit cannot perceive, which is an ego function, and ego cannot know, which is a spiritual function. Perception is ego, knowing is spirit. They are opposed in source, in direction, and in outcome. They are fundamentally, I went back a sentence, sorry. They are fundamentally irreconcilable because spirit cannot perceive and the ego cannot know. They are therefore not in communication and can never be in communication. Nevertheless, the ego can learn, even though its maker can be misguided. He cannot, however, make the totally lifeless out of the life given. Questions, comments? All righty, let's move on. Paragraph 3. Spirit need not be taught, but the ego must be. Learning is ultimately perceived as frightening because it leads to the relinquishment, not the destruction, of the ego to the light of spirit. The light of spirit does not destroy the ego, it relinquishes it. Again, the symbolism of you walk into a dark room, you're in the dark room, you're in the ego. You flip on the light. Woo, there's light, there's light. Where's the darkness? Well, there is no darkness. The darkness was just an illusion. As soon as you turn on the light, it disappears. So that's what happens to the ego when one becomes enlightened as a spiritual being. The ego just disappears. It's not that it's destroyed. It's just an illusion to begin with. So shedding light on the subject makes the darkness disappear. This is the change the ego must fear because it does not share my clarity. The ego wants to perpetuate itself. Its fear is that it will disappear. Its fear is that you're going to turn the light on. My lesson was like yours. So that's Jesus talking. He's saying his lesson was just like our lessons that we're going through now. And because I learned, I can teach it. So he became an enlightened being, just like the Buddha, and there have been others. He reached enlightenment, so he went through the journey, so he learned how to do it, and that's why he's able to teach us. And that's what he's attempting to do here in A Course in Miracles, is to teach us how to go through that journey, just like he did. Sentence 5, I will never attack your ego, but I am trying to teach you how its thought system arose. When I remind you of your true creation, your ego cannot but respond with fear. So again, spirit does not attack. Spirit is just, it's there. It's eternal. It's all-knowing. It's there. When you embrace spirit, you embrace that awareness, that all-knowingness. But spirit is not waging an attack on the ego. Spirit's very patient. Spirit is giving you the thoughts, the inspiration that you need to make the journey, but it's up to you. You have free will. You can reject spirit if you like. It's not going to force itself upon you. So it will not attack. Any questions? Paragraph 4. Teaching and learning are your greatest strengths now, because they enable you to change your mind and help others to change theirs. Refusing to change your mind will not prove that the separation has not occurred. The dreamer who doubts the reality of his dream while he is still dreaming is not really healing his split mind. You dream of a separated ego and believe in a world that rests upon it. This is very real to you. You cannot undo it by not changing your mind about it. If you are willing to renounce the role of guardian of your thought system and open it to me, I will correct it very gently and lead you back to God. The Course teaches that the ego world is just a dream. We're just dreaming. Our true selves are in the spirit world, in heaven, if you like. But we're sleeping. And while we're sleeping, we're dreaming. And the dreaming that we're doing is the dream of that we're here on earth living an ego life, that we were born and we're going to die and we're going to struggle and all these things are going to happen to us and we're going to laugh and we're going to cry and all of this. But that's just a dream. The dreamer who doubts the reality of his dream while he is still dreaming is not really healing his split mind. This mind is split between ego and spirit. So while you're still dreaming the dream, if you think the dream is real, then the dream is going to be real for you. Whatever you believe is true for you. So you dream of a separated ego and believe in a world that rests upon it. This is very real to you. If you are willing to renounce the role of ego and open it to spirit, then spirit will correct it very gently and lead you back to God. But that has to be your conscious choice and decision, because spirit will not interfere with your free will. You must make that decision. And you must ask spirit for guidance, because your higher self, your spiritual helpers and your spirit guides and all of them, they can't really do all that much without your permission. You have to make that decision and you have to ask them for help. Then they can do all kinds of stuff for you. Paragraph 5. Every good teacher hopes to give his students so much of his own learning that they will one day no longer need him. This is the one true goal of the teacher. It is impossible to conceive the ego, to convince the ego of this, because it goes against all of its own laws. But remember that laws are set up to protect the continuity of the system in which the lawmaker believes. It is natural for the ego to try to protect itself once you have made it, but it is not natural for you to want to obey its laws unless you believe them. The ego cannot make this choice because of the nature of its origin. You can because of the nature of yours. The nature of ego's origin is that we, the only begotten Son of God, created the ego by thinking that we could be separate from our Father. So the ego can't go against the nature of its origin, that's us, but we can because of the nature of ours, because our origin is that the Father created us whole and perfect and innocent and eternal. Any questions, comments? We have such an understanding group here tonight. Nobody has a question? Anything they'd like to comment upon? All right, I'll just have to keep hearing myself talk. Paragraph 6. Egos can clash in any situation, but spirit cannot clash at all. This is a very good lesson in the difference between ego and spirit. He's bringing up all these different points where ego, but spirit is this way. Ego is this way, but spirit's this way. Egos can clash in any situation, but spirit cannot clash at all. If you perceive a teacher as merely, quote, a larger ego, you will be afraid. Because to enlarge an ego would be to increase anxiety about separation. I will teach with you and live with you if you will think with me. But my goal will always be to absolve you finally from the need for a teacher. This is the opposite of the ego-orientated teacher's goal. He is concerned with the effect of his ego on other egos and therefore interprets their interaction as a means of ego preservation. I would not be able to devote myself to teaching if I believed this. And you will not be a devoted teacher as long as you believe it. I am constantly being perceived as a teacher either to be exalted or rejected, but I do not accept either perception for myself. Paragraph 7. Your worth is not established by teaching or learning. Your worth is established by God. As long as you dispute this, everything you do will be fearful, particularly any situation that lends itself to the belief in superiority and inferiority. Teachers must be patient and repeat their lessons until they are learned. And many have commented, oh, the Course in Miracles, it's so redundant. It says the same thing over and over again. Yes, there's a reason for that. And it's clearly stated right here. Teachers must be patient and repeat their lessons until they are learned. I am willing to do this because I have no right to set your learning limits for you. Again, nothing you do or think or wish or make is necessary to establish your worth. This point is not debatable except in delusions, except in the ego world. Your ego is never at stake because God did not create it. Your spirit is never at stake because he did create it. Any confusion on this point is delusional, and no form of devotion is possible as long as this delusion lasts. Questions, comments? Paragraph 8. The ego tries to exploit all situations into forms of praise for itself in order to overcome its doubts. It will remain doubtful as long as you believe in its existence. You who made it cannot trust it because in your right mind, you realize it is not real. When the Course says the right mind, they mean the spirit mind. You who made it cannot trust it because in your spirit mind, you realize it's not real. The only sane solution is not to try to change reality, which reality is spirit, ego's illusion, which is indeed a fearful attempt, but to accept it as it is. Okay, Donna, I got your message. I lost my place. Okay, sentence 5. You are part of reality, which stands unchanged beyond the reach of your ego, but within easy reach of spirit. When you are afraid, be still and know that God is real, and you are his beloved Son, in whom he is well pleased. Do not let your ego dispute this, because the ego cannot know what is as far beyond its reach as you are. Any questions? And again, the language of the Course says Father, says Son. Well, we know that this applies to all of us, and that in spirit, really, there are no genders in spirit. Spirit's just oneness. But the Course is using an ego language to try to teach us, so it's hampered by that. Paragraph 9. God is not the author of fear. You are. You have chosen to create unlike him and have therefore made fear for yourself. You are not at peace because you are not fulfilling your function. God gave you a very lofty function that you are not meeting. Your ego has chosen to be afraid instead of meeting it. When you awaken, you will not be able to understand this because it is literally incredible. Do not believe the incredible now. Any attempt to increase its believableness is merely to postpone the inevitable. The word inevitable is fearful to the ego, but joyous to the spirit. God is inevitable, and you cannot avoid him any more than he can avoid you. paragraph 10. The ego is afraid of the spirit's joy because once you have experienced it, you will withdraw all protection from the ego and become totally without investment in fear. Your investment is great now because fear is a witness to the separation, and your ego rejoices when you witness to it. Leave it behind. Do not listen to it and do not preserve it. Listen only to God, who is as incapable of deception as is the spirit he created. Release yourself and release others. Do not present a false and unworthy picture of yourself to others, and do not accept such a picture of them yourself. Now, you may be saying, well, where in paragraph 2, where your investment is great now because fear is a witness to the separation. And you may say, well, but I've learned, I've progressed, I embrace spirit, I denounce the fear and ego. I'm doing my best to work myself out of that mode of thinking. And this language is kind of harsh if I'm applying it to myself. But again, the Course is talking to everybody, the beginner as well as the advanced. So it would be very ego of you to have that kind of reaction to these words. Instead of just understanding and accepting that, okay, he's teaching here everybody on all different levels. So apply it to yourself as need be. If it doesn't apply to you, then just go on and get the bigger lesson from it, and don't get caught up in the minutia. Because we're all on different parts of the path. Then chapter 11. The ego has built a shabby and unsheltering home for you because it cannot build otherwise. Do not try to make this impoverished house stand. Its weakness is your strength. Only God could make a home that is worthy of his creations, who have chosen to leave it empty by their own disposition. Yet his home will stand forever and is ready for you when you choose to enter it. Of this you can be wholly certain. God is incapable of creating the perishable as the ego is of making the eternal. And this reflects back on the parable of the prodigal son. He chose to leave the father and go off on his own, but this happened to him and that happened to him, and he finally said, I was a lot better off at my father's house. And so he decided to return, and what happened? The father rejoiced. Oh, my son is back. Let's throw a big feast. The father was always there waiting for you. He'll never abandon you. Your home is always there in spirit waiting for you. Whenever you decide to go back, it's there. That's the meaning of the prodigal son parable. Questions, comments? Paragraph 12. Of your ego, you can do nothing to save yourself of others. But of your spirit, you can do everything for the salvation of both. Humility is a lesson for the ego, not for the spirit. Spirit is beyond humility. because it recognizes its radiance and gladly sheds its light everywhere. The meek shall inherit the earth because their egos are humble, and this gives them truer perception. The kingdom of heaven is the Spirit's right, whose beauty and dignity are far beyond doubt, beyond perception, and stand forever as the mark of love, of the love of God for his creations, who are wholly worthy of him and only of him. Nothing else is sufficiently worthy to be a gift for a creation of God himself. I will substitute for your ego if you wish, but never for your spirit. A father can safely leave a child with an elder brother who has shown himself responsible, but this involves no confusion about the child's origin. The brother can protect the child's body and his ego, but he does not confuse himself with the father because he does this. I can be entrusted with your body and your ego only because this enables you not to be concerned with them and lets me teach you their unimportance. I could not understand their importance to you if I had not once been tempted to believe in them myself. Let us undertake to learn this lesson together, so we can be free of them together. I need devoted teachers who share my aim of healing the mind. Spirit is far beyond the need of your protection or mine. Remember this. In this world, you need not have tribulation, because I have overcome the world. That is why you should be of good cheer. In this world, you need not have tribulation, because I have overcome the world. That is why you should be of good cheer. So Jesus is speaking to us as younger brothers. He's putting himself in the place of an older brother who is taking care of his younger sibling, trying to teach him, trying to bring him up. And because he overcame the ego world, he can do that. He can teach us. And we should be of good cheer to have him there guiding us and showing us the way through this course. Helene.
Oh, thanks, John. I was curious about a sentence in paragraph 12, just the previous sentence, when it says, the meek shall inherit the earth because their egos are humble. That seems to me, although I may have missed it, it seems to me to be the first reference in this book, as far as we've gotten, that talks about the ego in any kind of flattering way, if you will. It seems as if the majority of the book is suggesting that the ego is the beginning and end of all of our problems. But I guess I've been pondering throughout your readings tonight whether or not we almost need the ego to make the choices that this book is telling us we should be making.
No, we don't need the ego. We're making these choices with our spirit mind. So let's go to that paragraph 12 again. Of your ego, you can do nothing to save yourself or others. But of your spirit, you can do everything for the salvation of both. Humility is a lesson for the ego. So, in other words, while in your ego state, if you can embrace that humility, which spirit does not need because it says spirit is beyond humility. But if you can embrace that humility, then that is a lesson. The meek shall inherit the earth because their egos are humble. They'll inherit the spiritual, it says the earth, but well, again, he's trying to comment upon a Bible verse, so he's using that language. But the understanding that I have of it is that as we progress out of ego towards spirit, then our ego becomes more humble because we have tamed it, so to speak. We have become meeker. We have become humbler. We are embracing spirit more and leaving more and more of the ego behind. It's a progression. I know I've used the illustration of turning on the light and all of a sudden the darkness disappears, but that isn't really what happens. Nor it's normally that it's more like the sun rising. It's very dark, but as the star begins to rise, there's a little bit of light that's shed, and it's not quite as dark. And then as the sun continues to rise, more and more of the dark dissipates and more of the light is shining, but it's a gradual process. And so that's what we're doing here. So when the ego becomes humbler and gives them a truer perception, so that while you're in the ego world, your truer perception is that, oh, I can see the light of spirit. I'm beginning to understand this, the light of spirit. I can see more and more of it now as I keep walking through this journey. Eventually, I'm going to get to that place where the sun is at high noon and I'm completely out of the ego. But while I'm still on that journey and that progression, my ego will become more and more humble, and I, the meek, shall inherit actually not the earth, but the kingdom of heaven. Does that solve it for you?
Yeah, I think I understand it better. I do think, though, I'm still having just a little bit of a trouble understanding the distinction between the we are progressing out of ego into the spirit world. The we in that sentence, isn't that, I mean, in some respect, the ego as well? The way you define it, it almost seems as if the ego has to be somewhat complacent in this transformation.
What sentence is the we in?
No, you said it. I'm quoting you. It's not in a sentence.
Oh,
I mean, I think when you're saying we, you mean the spirit. I'm thinking that you don't mean that ego is involved at all. I guess maybe it's just my ego that is having a hard time with it. Sorry. Yeah, no, I understand it better.
I don't recall my precise sentence with the we. But we, I mean you and me and all of us here in the ego, working our way through this. We, us.
Okay, so then I'm understanding it correctly. You're saying all of us in the ego when you say we.
Yeah.
So don't our egos to some extent have to be complacent in accepting God and the spirit?
Well, the ego of itself will find that very difficult, but as we progress through the journey and become more and more understanding and enlightened, then it's almost like, you know what? The ego doesn't have to accept it. The ego is just not exerting as strong of an influence over our mind anymore. It's almost like it's being forgotten. And so we learn not to struggle with that. We learn not to give in to it. We learn that we have free will and we can choose spirit over ego. And as we do that day by day, as we choose not to get angry, as we choose not to seek revenge, as we choose to forgive, as we choose to love and not hate, then we're slowly progressing out of ego. And the ego is becoming more and more humble because it's occupying a much lower status in our mind. Does that make sense?
Got it. Yeah, yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Arlette, any comments?
I don't know really what to say. I mean, I'm still working on all this stuff myself. I mean, and it amazes me how the ego has so much to say. Even after studying for years about it, to try to get out of the ego and into the spirit, and it amazes me. I'm not any better off than I am. I guess that's the ego. There you go. So thank you.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. But you know what? Look at some old pictures of yourself. When you look back in retrospect and you see how much you've progressed, think back to when you really had a hard time, where you were really struggling, and you'll see the progression that you've made and the improvement that you've made. It's hard to see it on a day-by-day basis. We look in the mirror every day, but we never see ourselves growing older. And yet, when we look at pictures when we were teenagers and say, oh my God, I went from that to this. How did that happen? I don't remember that happening.
Yeah, that's really true. You're really right, John. I guess, when we read this, and then I'm in the now, basically thinking, how am I not any more progressed than this, but you're really right. Compared to where I came from, I am way better than I used to be, way much.
Yeah, I mean, I've known you for several years, and I can attest that you have grown and you're in a better place today than you were when I first met you. So, and I haven't known you that long, but
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So don't be so hard on yourself,
I know, I am, and especially for some reason today, I've really been hard on myself for no really reason. There's nothing different about today but I'm having a little struggle today with it. It's really good to see you, Helene, too. I'm glad you're here. Yeah. And
I feel the same, Arlette. Thank you. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you.
So Arlette, you were having an ego attack today?
I guess so, yeah. So I guess I gotta be meek. Yeah.
When my mother when something happened, something bad happened to her, she would say, "Oh, I'm being attacked by the devil. I'm being attacked by the devil."
Yeah.
And I say, "Oh, I'm being attacked by the ego. I'm being attacked by the ego."
Yeah. Now you say that, I actually, when I was back in the born again churches that I used to go to big time, at it felt like the devil was attacking me at times, and now I'm understanding it was just the ego, but they called it the devil, and
Right.
and actually all the terminology too is progressing. It's kind of getting in the course. To me, it's more accurate here than it was in that other in the other system.
Right.
Am I breaking up? Yeah.
A little bit,
me
a
too.
little bit, but I did understand what you were saying.
Yeah, that's what happens when my video's on.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, okay,
Got to see it.
we have reached the end of our lesson for today. So next week we will start on where are we? Section 2, the ego and false autonomy, on page 56. Put my marker there. That's where we'll start
Yeah.
next week. So if there's any last minute anythings, no, then let's go ahead and have a moment of silence, okay? Thank you, friends. Hope to see you next week. Ciao, ciao.